Okay, let this be the intro to the shop update. It's not really a shop update. It's basically going to only be about the glow shift gauges, but let me tell you why I said shop update. In my last shop update of a week or a little over a week ago, I ended the segment by showing you a gauge, a glow shift gauge that I had gotten to use as a, let's call it a sample for the haul truck. I wanted to see if those glow shift gauges would fit into the haul truck interior or that classic look, and it did not. And but it was a cheaper gauge, and it was worth the money just buying it to see what it would look like, and with the thought that if I didn't use it for the haul truck, that I could always use it for my truck. So I am not going to use it for the haul truck because it does not fit that classic look of the gauges in the old 74 Ford F750. But I thought it's an oil pressure gauge and I can use it for anything. So what I did is I had bought a pillar mount recently or ordered the pillar mount and two other glow shift gauges that I wanted to use in this truck, my newer truck that you see behind me. They were that oil gauge, voltmeter, and a water temperature or coolant temperature gauge, and I got them. So what this video is going to be about is me installing them. I'm going to show you the installation points for the sensors on the engine, well, not the voltmeter, but the coolant and the oil pressure gauge. I will show you the mount locations that I chose to mount them into. So what happens is it's going to start off a little rough. I actually had mounted the pillar or the gauges in the pillar mount and had that up there, and we're going to show you just how I ran the wiring down, got over there, and then tried to relay to you what the wiring was and how it worked, and kind of fumbled through that, but I corrected it in the next clip on. But that's not why I'm making this video. Why I'm making this video is I'm having issues with the oil pressure gauge. Now, just note that before I bought these gauges, I did not look up anything on the internet. So I bought the gauge, had a issue with the oil pressure gauge, the way it read, and you will see that in the video. And then let me tell you, come back and explain to you after I show you those segments of what I did with glow shift about rectifying the problem and what my responses from them were. So it has not, as of this filming of this clip right now, the introduction, it has not been resolved, and I'll explain it why when I come back. So I got the other two gauges and I got the pillar mount. And here are the gauges. I know that you really can't see them very well, but I'll show it to you better. What I did is just put the gauges in the pillar mount, string the wires down through, put the pillar mount on, and one of the wires, there's a lead wire that goes to the oil pressure sensor. That's that. These wires in here, like the orange wire goes to the light relay, or not relay, a light source. So when you turn the lights on the gauges come on. The black, I think, is ground. Yellow is a common power source, and the red is a yellow is positive, constant positive. Red is, you know what, I got right here. Let me tell you. Yellow is a constant positive. Red is a ignition switched circuit. Black is ground. And orange is a orange is a headlight. So yellow is a constant positive. Red is the ignition switched. Black is ground, and orange is a light source or a headlight thing. And you're going to see one green wire in here. That green wire goes to the ironically, it's not ground. It goes to the water coolant temperature sensor. And then there's two wires on that. One gets grounded, and one is that green wire. I've got to run a wire out to that. I've got to hook them things up too. I was kind of checking them out today. There's a couple of plugs that I can pull out and get it in. The oil pressure sensor plug is on top of the oil filter, and I might actually need like a 1/8" street elbow to get that, because there's a tube right above it that could interfere with that little connection module that screws into it. Not the connection module itself, but the wiring clip that's on top of the module where that this wire plugs into. So that clip right there might interfere on that pipe. So I'm going to see if I can get a street elbow and put on that. But anyways, there's that. I'll bring you back when it's done. Okay, let me just explain to you further that the wiring, and let me explain to you why. Sometimes I'll go over, I'll do something in the shop here and forget to film it at the time or whatever. So what I did is grab the camera, took it over here, and was going to show you the gauges into the truck, into that pillar mount, and started thinking about something else. That's kind of why I fumbled and stuttered around. Let me just explain to you the gauges. So you have yellow, the gauge wiring. You have yellow, which is a constant power supply, and I'm assuming that constant power supply is a power supply that provides the voltage to whatever instrument you're reading, whether it be oil pressure, water temperature, etc., etc. Then you have a red, which is the ignition source. So that wire probably turns the gauge on when you turn the ignition on. So you have yellow, constant power supply that probably feeds the sensor for the gauge. Red, which is a ignition source, so that turns the gauge on when you turn the ignition on. Black is a ground, which is very evident. And orange goes to a lighting circuit. What that does is when you turn the ignition on, the gauge lights up. When you turn the lights on, what it does is it dims the gauge for nighttime vision, so that the gauge isn't that constant bright glowing thing in your face when you have like a pillar mounter or something like that. So when the lights go on, what that orange wire does is dims the gauge lights to better, have a less glowing effect in the nighttime. So just wanted to clarify the gauge wiring. As long as I am over here, I might as well show you where I've got to get those sensors. So the 3 gauges, as I had explained in a previous shop update, are voltage, oil pressure, and water temperature. So the water temperature gauge has got to go into that silvery plug that you see back there on the top of the head. The oil pressure gauge is gotta go, and hopefully you can see this. Let me get the light in a better position so that I can get down there and point at it. It's that plug right down there that's on top of the oil filter. Hopefully you can see it right down there. But anyways, those are the 2 spots that I've got to get into. The voltage gauge, of course, apparently, or logically, is just a common source wire, 12-volt wire, like off of the battery. But I'll bring you back. Okay, we're sitting inside of my truck, and I'm showing you a shot of the gauges as they are. Now, you've seen in the previous clips where I stumbled and bumbled through the wiring stuff and then further explained it in another clip. I also showed you the engine where I had to mount the water temperature and oil pressure gauge. Water temperature or coolant temperature, however you want to look at it. They call it a water temperature. I did not hook up the water temperature, and I will explain that further in another clip. I didn't hook it up because it's too hard to get to because of that EGR. The EGR is deleted on the engine. It's not removed from the engine, but it is deleted. But it's too hard to get that water sensor down in there, water temperature sensor down in there between the side of the valve cover and the EGR. So I will explain further that in another clip, but I'm in here showing you an issue. So what I did is hooked up the voltage, and I also hooked up the oil pressure. But I have a issue with the oil pressure, and I'm going to start the engine up, and I'm going to show you what the issue is. That's normal for how the gauges work. Okay, so voltage, and you'll see that voltage increase up in a minute. This is the oil pressure, and you can see how it's fluctuating back and forth. And it's also reading between 65 and like 72 pounds. Here is my dashboard, and I have the oil pressure pulled up on the dashboard, and you'll see that it's only 50 pounds on the digital readout for the oil pressure. So, which is right, which is wrong? Ironically, somebody emailed me right as after I had hooked up the oil pressure, emailed me from Glow Shift wondering how my experience was going with their sales of their gauges and stuff. And I emailed them back and told them that I had a problem with the oil pressure gauge, but I wanted to run it for a day and try and resolve what the issue was. My first thought was I might have had some air trapped in between the port for the oil pressure gauge and the oil sensor. So that was my first thought. Well, after I ran it for a while and noticed what it did, and let me shut you up because I don't know what background noise we're getting here. As you'll see that it fluctuates between that. Well, okay, so you'll understand that it's reading about 25 pounds, 25 to 30 pounds above what the digital gauge on the dashboard reads. Well, that 25 pounds does not stay consistent. When I'm driving along, my oil pressure is usually somewhere in the neighborhood of between 50 and 52 pounds, according to the digital gauge on the dashboard. Sometimes when I stop, it will drop down to as low as 38. And then as soon as I start up again, it goes back up to the 52. Stop, when I say stop, I mean stop for a red light or something, and sit and idle for a little while. This gauge, again, the digital gauge will do that, go from 50 to 52 range down to 38 to 40 psi. This gauge will actually go from like 80 down to 25. So if the gauge was off consistently at 25 psi, instead of going down to 30, it would be at like 55. But it doesn't do that. It goes way down below the range. So it's not on a continuous scale of being off. So I left it on there, and I kind of showed my grandson it when he came over. I hadn't even told him that I installed these gauges. I kind of showed it to him and was talking to him about it last night, and kind of had maybe an epiphany during the course of the night after I had thought about this for a while and why it's off. So what I'm going to do, I don't want to make this a long video, but what I'm going to do is I actually have to go home to grab lunch. Maybe I can just take the camera with me and I will show you what happens is when you're driving and how the range fluctuates on it. So, and then after I do that, I'll bring you back when I'm back to the shop, and I'm going to tell you kind of what I'm thinking. Okay, I'm going to let you see the gauges, and I'm doing it handheld with my phone because I was going to shoot it with the one GoPro, but that GoPro has issues with battery charge. It's not that it has issues, that I'll explain it later. You see how it's going up? It's going up to like 90 pounds. And it's at 58 on the dashboard digital one. Now when I stopped, it's at 48 on the dashboard. It's at 50 on that, but it's fluctuating around. Went up to like 98 pounds. But anyways, that's it. I'm gonna explain it. Okay, this video I think is going to become so long that I need to break it up into two parts. I just got through showing you the drive in it, and I told you that the previous night I'd had maybe an epiphany, and I could have thought about what the problem could have been. I'm not going to show you that. It turned out that that wasn't the problem. But let me, it is a valid point, and it could be a concern if you're trying to diagnose electrical wiring problems where you've got inconsistencies or spikes like I do. But anyways, let me, in the one of the previous clips, I told you that ironically that I had received an email and emailed them back and told them that I was having problems with the oil pressure gauge. I told you that my point, my thought wasn't valid. It wasn't the issue. So I called Glow Shift and I explained to them the problems that I had had. And the guy was in technical support. I'm not going to mention his name right now. Let me see where this goes, and I will let you know who it was if it doesn't go well. He kind of equated to me that the problem, he didn't believe that it was his gauge, that he thought it might be the gauge that was standard equipment on the truck. So one of the things that he wanted me to do was pull the sensor off of the engine and put on a regular gauge and read the oil pressure off of the sensor port via a regular gauge. And I kind of thought, you know, that's kind of unusual. But I said to him, you know, it's going to cost me money to come up with piping arrangements and stuff like that, probably $20 to come up with piping arrangements, and I probably got a gauge that I can use. If I didn't have a gauge, it would probably cost me in the neighborhood of 50 or 60 or $70 to do this. But I says, so just out of curiosity, how much is a sensor? And he says, well, it's $37. And I says, can't you just send me a friggin' sensor? It's is going to cost me as much to hook up a gauge to this thing to validate the thing. And so what is your personal opinion about it? Is it the sensor, or do you think it's the gauge? And he says, well, we've never had this exact problem before. And I couldn't comment on it. I wouldn't want to throw an opinion out there whether it's the sensor or the gauge, if it's our equipment at all. And I says, okay, well, can you just send me the gauge or send me the sensor and let me try that, and if it's not that, I'll send it back to you or whatever. And he says, no, no. I've got to figure out what's going on. And he says, I'm going to have your ordering information where you bought the part. And I says, you know, it started to annoy me, really annoy me. But I let it go, and I hung up with him. And then I started thinking about this. And I called him back, and I says, listen, called him by his name. I says, listen, you know, I've got to tell you one more thing. I started doing a YouTube video about this, me going to install the glow shift gauges in it. And I says, I'm going to continue that video. And is this the way that you really want your company to be represented by this? Or do you just want to send me the sensor, or I'll pay for the sensor and Once I determine it is a sensor, you can just refund me my money. He says, "Are you threatening me?" And I said, "What? This isn't a threat. I was trying to be nice about this thing and let you know what was going on. And you perceive this as a threat?" And I just let it go, said goodbye to him, and go from there. Well, in hindsight, I got an email response. I told you that I had received that email from marketing from the company, and I had written back to him and told him that I was having problems with the oil pressure gauge, but I wanted a day just to make sure that it was not trapped air or something like that in there. I had gotten a response from him, and I didn't read it until this morning. I didn't even know that I had gotten it. I was going through my emails and saw a response to it in this morning and read it. And he didn't know that I was the same guy that had been talking to him apparently on the telephone. And he wanted information, the ordering information, and what was wrong with the oil pressure sensor and stuff like that, or the gauge. So I emailed him back, and I think it was the same guy. He had used an abbreviated part of his name for when I talked to him on the phone, and his formal name in the email. But I'm sure that it's probably the same guy, because it's a common name, but not that common. Where there would be, I'm not sure how big GlowShift is, but I'm pretty sure that there's probably not two people in GlowShift with the same name. I emailed him back. I actually hooked up that gauge and did that, and emailed him back showing him the digital gauge on the dashboard reading 42 psi, and the gauge that I had hooked up via tubing to that outlet port, which also read 42 psi. It didn't bounce around. Neither of the gauges bounced around like the GlowShift gauge does. But anyways, I sent that off to him. About 2 hours later, I get another email from the guy saying, "Okay, I received your picture, but now I want you to put a voltmeter on the sensor and check different lead points on that." So that's where I am right now. And I'm not really sure where this is going, but it's going to be more than a one-part series. So let me end this here, and I will bring you back and let you know what I had done and what the results of this whole thing are going to be. But let me just interject one last thought on this. Before I bought GlowShift gauges, I had never gone on the internet and looked up anything on them. I did last night, and there is scathing reports on this, on GlowShift gauges. People are saying, "Oh yeah, we bought them, and we're telling you right now." They were like on forums where people would text in or write in and say, "Listen, I'm having an issue. Does anybody know how to resolve it?" And people would respond, "Listen, I've replaced 3, 4, 5, 6 sensors on my GlowShift gauges, and it just keeps happening. You might as well just throw the gauges away and buy some better type of gauges." So with that being said, let me let you go. This is part 1. I'll bring you back for part 2 and let you know if GlowShift did resolve the issue, if there's I think there might be other issues and how we got them resolved.